Welcome. As we give people in Minnesota to join the call, please scan the QR code on the bottom of the screen to follow Vendor Centric on LinkedIn. We regularly share relevant content along with invitations for future panel discussions events. So please follow us. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our first monthly panel of 2024. My name is Paul Schrantz, Director of Business Development Alliances for Vendor Centric, and I'm thrilled to be the host for this year's panels. Just a few logistics before I turn it over to our CEO and founder, Tom Rogers, who will moderate today's panel. We'll be recording the session to send to you in the next few days, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A room throughout our discussion. So please add any questions you have for our panelists. We have a great deal of topics to cover today, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can towards the end of the session. And lastly, we'll be running 2 live polls today. Please participate as your collective insights are truly valuable. Okay, Tom, now over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Welcome, everyone. As Paul mentioned, I'm Tom Rogers. I'm the founder and CEO of Vendor Centric. Appreciate all of you joining us for our first panel of the year. As Paul mentioned, we're going to be talking about 2024's top trends in vendor management. We're going to have a great conversation today. There's so much happening in the world of vendor management right now. We have a lot to cover. On one hand, we've got a lot of boards, customers, auditors, regulators. They're all putting pressure on companies to adopt more holistic, robust practices for managing vendors and other third-party relationships. There's a lot of pressure on companies to really focus more on vendor management themselves. At the same time, you've got companies are outsourcing service to vendors more than ever before. We have new regulations hitting the marketplace. Seems like on a monthly basis, sometimes a lot of them focused on third-party risk management. And at the same time, you've got a ton of investment going into new vendor management technology, a lot of it focusing on leveraging artificial intelligence and integrating that into platforms to really make work faster, more streamlined, more valuable as well. So there's so much going on. It's crazy. It's almost a little bit overwhelming sometimes. But the great news is that there's never been a better time to really drive value through strong vendor management practices. And so we really have a lot we want to cover today. So let me get going and introduce our panelists so we can get started on the conversation. Let's see, Daniel and Hilary, if you guys want to come on with me. Awesome, welcome. Hey, so first let me introduce, sorry, I was finding my notes here. First, let me introduce Hilary Jewhurst. Hilary has spent over 20 years in senior leadership roles in operations and risk management with an emphasis on third-party risk. She's currently the head of third-party risk education and advocacy at Venminder, which is a leading third-party risk management software company. At Venminder, Hilary drives thought leadership and develops and delivers educational content such as blogs, podcasts, white papers, presentations, checklists, tools, infographics, all kinds of stuff. Hilary, you guys are doing a lot of good educational content over there. I saw Hilary present last year at the Third-Party Risk Association in Nashville, where I had an opportunity to meet her. She knocked her presentation out of the park, so I'm really happy to have her on the panel with me today. Welcome, Hilary.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for your kind words.
You got it. Next up, I want to introduce Daniel Barnes. Daniel has over 10 years experience in procurement, commercial contract management, and supply chain management. He's currently the community manager at Gatekeeper, which is also a leading vendor and contract lifecycle management software company. At Gatekeeper, Daniel provides thought leadership and advocates for continuous improvement across all aspects of vendor and contract management. He also hosts the podcast Procurement Reimagined, where he discusses trends in procurement, supply chain, and commercial contract management. I had the pleasure of joining Daniel for one of his podcasts last year. We had a blast. So I was excited that he agreed to be on the panel and join us today. Welcome, Daniel.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here.
And I know you're feeling a little under the weather, so I appreciate you. I appreciate you
No
hanging
worries.
in there. Yeah, you got it. Awesome. So listen, I thought we'd kick things off with what is probably the hottest topic of them all right now, and that's artificial intelligence. Generative AI tools are being used for everything from RFP development to contract management to risk analysis. AI is also starting to get integrated into vendor management platforms, making it really readily accessible in day-to-day operations. So it's going to be more ubiquitous in how folks are actually doing their day-to-day work. It's a trend that's impacting everybody. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on that. But I thought before we did, what we do is I'd start off with a quick poll of the folks that are joining us today, because we're curious as to how people are actually using AI today. Maybe I'll provide a little bit of context for our conversation as well. So Paul, can you pull up that poll? Let's do that real quick first, and then we'll jump into this conversation.
Tom, I don't know. We've actually unfortunately had a problem with the system. The polls are not coming up right now. I do apologize. Let me see if I can troubleshoot and we'll circle back. I apologize.
Okay. All right. Well, then we won't do the poll and we'll just go right into the conversation. So Daniel, I'm going to start with you because you've been doing a lot I've been seeing a lot of your posts around AI. I know you're following this really closely. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the marketplace, where you think the opportunities are, what people should be focusing on with regard to AI.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, super bullish on what AI it has already done. I know we're probably focusing more on Gen AI, yeah, generative AI, but we've had AI in across procurement tech and that space for a long time, and it's been doing good stuff behind the scenes, and people probably didn't realize what was actually happening. And to your point, Tom, I think that's probably where Gen AI will get to once we've got past this sort of hype phase, which is a good hype phase, by the way. It's not to put a downer on it. Yeah, like to your point, what I'm seeing people and what I'm talking to people about is how can, just starting off with something like ChatGPT, right? How can they use that, something like that, to just improve their day-to-day work? People have been using it for templates to find out more and more insights. I know that we've spoken, and I actually launched a little GPT agent for procurement, and I've had like 200 people play around with that, and that's kind of wild when you think about it, that someone can just set something up, put some knowledge in there, and people can go and talk to it and use it. So I'm really bullish on it internally from like a vendor management, contract management perspective, from knowledge management, just outside of sort of procurement tech or anything like that. I think we're going to see a huge improvements there. I think about the software people use, whether it's Confluence, Notion, Basecamp. I think all of those sort of solutions will make use of AI to the fullest to make sure that you can find out anything about your organization, your processes, your policies, and things like that. It's all the boring stuff that people kind of forget about somewhat, but I think it's really important. And then from like a maturity perspective, when we think about people who interact with vendors, I still talk to a lot of people about doing things on Excel, right? SharePoint. They're working with disparate systems. They are working manually, let's say. And there's a huge opportunity there to start playing around with AI, with no code or low code applications, things like Zapier, Made, connecting those sort of apps, whether it's Google Sheets, SharePoint, with ChatGPT to help craft like vendor emails and update databases and pull data out of it and use it. So I think that's exciting. And then when you look at all of the tech solutions, and this may come up at some point, but there are a ridiculous number of tech solutions in the market now, like not even just from a vendor management perspective or a TPRM perspective, but just in what I would kind of bundle all of this into procurement tech, ProcureTech 100, an organization, or ProcureTech is the organization. They assist over 4,000 procurement tech vendors. in 2023. And that just kind of shows the scale of the market. We're going to see a lot of companies take people from that manual way of working. They're going to use AI to extract data and get really good insights out of that data that tells you what you should be doing next. And then as people mature, I think that, and I don't think anyone's really doing this yet, but we'll start to see Gen AI really help with workflow development, whether it's workflow build-in from scratch and things like that. So yeah, I'm bullish on it. I think we're in a good place, and I'm just excited to see. I think 2024 will be a really big year for it, sort of maturing from a tech solution perspective, and also as people get more familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, just listing everything you listed off there, it's going so fast and there's so much noise right now. It's kind of, I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, all right, what can I actually be doing? So practically, how could I start using some of these tools, and maybe even how can I use it both through a generative tool like a ChatGPT or some of these chat bots that you can create yourself, or within software platforms. I saw something recently about Microsoft has something called Microsoft Copilot, and
Yeah.
a colleague of mine had showed how they had uploaded their HR policy manual into Copilot, and then they integrated Copilot into Microsoft Teams because they're a Microsoft shop. And I started thinking about, okay, what if you were to update your procurement management, just something simple, procurement management procedures, third-party risk management procedures, things like that you could take a document that somebody has to look to page 62 to try to find the answer, to now you just go into a chat bot, you type a question in, it searches it for you, and it brings you back some information. So it's interesting because I think there's so much noise, it's hard to figure out where to focus your energy. Hilary, on the third-party risk side, well, first of all, any thoughts you have broadly about AI, but on the third-party risk side, what are you seeing? What are you seeing there?
Well, to echo what Daniel said, there's so much out there right now. It is a very hot topic. And there's a lot of enthusiasm, and there's also a lot of the sky is falling. So I feel like just in general, the capabilities that AI can bring to the table are super exciting, especially in third-party risk management. Right. So we're seeing any number of providers integrate AI into their solutions for those reasons, for automation, to have better, communication and flagging and data consolidation. So that is something that is shifting very rapidly. And I think from that perspective, it's really great. I know, as we all know, that third-party risk management teams are often really understaffed. It is like Herculean effort to just get through the day. So any tool that can help, shave time, give more precise results, because I think that's a lot of what we want, and to help us really look at big data sets and draw more sophisticated and relevant conclusions, that's all good. That's all good. So, and generally how it's aiding third-party risk management, it's super exciting. There's lots going on. From a third-party risk manager perspective, right? When we're thinking about, look at all the ways it can just help us do third-party risk management. Well, look at all the ways it can help businesses and individuals and organizations like across the board. So naturally, a lot of our organizations are going to want to tap into that energy, look at those offerings, let's get it working, because it's really exciting. But there are a lot of considerations for third-party risk management teams, how to be part of this conversation as your organization's like, let's go get us some AI, I think one thing to really think about most in the first regard is that AI is a technology offering, right? And it's a data dependent. So all of our regular rules and tools and processes for technology providers that have data need to apply, right? We need to have those good risk reviews and due diligence. But we also need to think a little bit more about our internal controls and how they complement what the vendor is doing. So, for example, bias in data sets. That's a huge problem. Everyone's worried, like, well, if the data is not trained properly, it's going to have this bias. You and your regular third-party risk management role may not be able to determine that. That may not be something even that your subject matter expert is going to determine right now. But you need to be able to ask those questions and ask the business internally, how are you reviewing for bias? What, let's look at that information. How does that complement our controls, for example? So I think that's kind of a new added element in that third-party risk management space when it comes to AI.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot around bias, and I mean, all this stuff is just happening so fast. It's so new. There's as many questions that are coming up as there are practical ways to use it. But one of the things I just want to touch on quickly is you talked about data governance, right? So as you think about the ability of AI to actually look at data and help analyze it and feed things to the top, in this case on risk, let's say, for example, reviewing questionnaire responses, looking at multiple questionnaire responses over your ecosystem of vendors that you're risk assessing, and start to identify common data, common risk trends that you're finding across the portfolio, things like that. You've got to be asking the right questions. You've got to be collecting the right data, because if you don't have that, you don't have good data governance, you're not really going to get much in the way of good information back, I would say, from whatever AI tool you're using. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the old adage of garbage in, garbage out, right? So, even though these tools can deliver so much value, it's really up to you and your organization to make sure that those mechanisms, those input mechanisms, those gathering mechanisms, the criteria for the data you're gathering are all solid. I mean, I'm sure Daniel has lots to add on that from that perspective.
Yeah, like just on the data point, I think it's something that people are almost being blinded to, right? Like the fact that you actually need some decent data in the first place to make use of AI. So it's almost been treated like a silver bullet. And most of the people I talk to, they're so far away from being ready to use AI.
Yeah.
So their absolute priority is get the data in, and AI may help, right, with the extraction and things like that. But we've had that around for a number of years. That's not something new with regards to Gen AI. So I think really it's still about getting the fundamentals in place when it comes to your vendors, their risks, their contracts. Make sure you've got all of that data. Make sure you know what you are needing to measure and to track, and have a good process. Like Tom, I was just going over our previous conversation actually about an hour or so ago, and you're talking about the vendor management office and putting all of this together and making sure you've got that framework to go forwards. And I think that's going to be truer than ever with regards to using Gen AI.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's why I think with AI getting integrated into platforms, so it's not sitting outside the platform, it's integrated within, making it ubiquitous, and then focusing on getting the data right within whatever the core platform is you're using. Then it's also integrating in other sources of information to give you that holistic picture. That's going to take a while. That's not going to happen overnight. A lot of people still aren't even on core platforms for procurement or contract management or third-party risk management. So there's an evolutionary process here, I think, the company's going to have to go through to really take advantage of AI. I was just curious, though, before I move on to the next topic, which is closely related around technology, are there any, just as you're working with people today, are there any one or two real quick and easy practical things you're finding folks do in terms of using AI that you could say, hey, here's a quick win for you, like the one I had mentioned earlier about Microsoft Copilot?
I'm seeing AI drive risk intelligence like crazy. And so some of that monitoring work that we need to do risk intelligence and these folks offering it. This is not new, but it's becoming more popular. We're knowing more about it. But I feel like one of the very quick hits that any organization can, really utilize and leverage that AI is in that risk monitoring space. Because you're getting, of so many different risk domains, providers that are specializing in it. They're giving really targeted data, and they're also kind of standardizing what it is we're looking for, right? It's not the needle in the haystack. So from my perspective, I think risk intelligence and how it's being leveraged for ongoing monitoring is an excellent first quick pass for AI.
And it's already being integrated into those solutions. So they're pulling that external data around, negative news and bankruptcy filings and all that stuff. And AI is built into that. And that was the biggest thing with the risk monitoring platforms. There's so much noise, you don't know where to spend your energy. So if AI can help reduce that noise and really hone in on those things, and it's already baked in, as you were saying, Hilary, that could be a quick win. That's a good one. Daniel, anything you could think of?
I think the simplification of contractual agreements, right? So, Tom, you probably have people talk to you about this. I've had some roles where one of my main responsibilities was creating contract management plans, which largely was a summarization of the contract in plain language and putting out the RACI, the roles of very what obligations, things like that. So having AI do that for you. I still know people who are doing that as a role, and I kind of worried for them long term. I hope they sort of mature, and we are on that maturity curve. But that's just a very easy, quick win that takes a complex agreement, or obviously not every agreement is complex, but takes an agreement and makes it a summary of it in plain language, or as much of plain language as possible, so that anyone in the business can understand it. I'm a big fan of that.
That's a good one. Yeah, hopefully if the contract's written well enough, they can extract it.
And for caveat with data, right?
Out of there that you can actually use. And those tools, so I know like Gatekeeper has AI that's built in that can extract data out of contracts, feed into the system now. So this whole space is evolving. It's going to be really interesting. I think this year there's going to be a lot of testing and trying to figure out, where's the low-hanging fruit that we can start taking advantage of and get going on this AI if you haven't done it already. Sorry about the poll, folks. It would have been interesting to see how folks are using that. So let's move on to our next topic, which is a closely related topic to AI. I think it's more around broader technology in the vendor management space, really focused around digitization, automation. So obviously AI is a key part of that, but the space is growing a lot. So 5 years ago, it was about 5 years ago, I think I ran a search on Capterra, so the software site, right? And I typed in vendor management software. I think there were, if I remember correctly, it was something like 60 or 70 different platforms that were out there. Everything under vendor management was procurement, purchase to pay, spend management, third-party risk management, contract management. So all those different buckets were under that umbrella. I went to Capterra earlier this year, maybe a couple of weeks ago, and there were 450 under vendor management. Dan, you said there's 4,000 from procurement tech that was looking. So I don't know what those would be, but let's just say that the space is growing a lot. There's a lot of money coming in to technology right now, more than ever before. It's a crowded marketplace, but I think it's getting crowded because there's clearly an opportunity to leverage this type of technology to drive value throughout the business through better management of vendors. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the space. Hilary, I thought I'd start with you this time, maybe more broadly, if you would, or if you want to talk a little bit more around kind of what's happening in third-party risk management and some of the innovations that are happening in technology around that.
Yeah, I will focus on third-party risk management only because you brought up such a great point. This is becoming a very crowded marketplace. And at the risk of sounding a little jaded or whatnot, I feel like, those of us who've been around long enough to see like the initial .com booms and some of these things, that it's we go through these cycles where, there's something that is relevant and important. In this case, it's third-party risk management. It's important because, boards and regulators and customers are asking to do better, to have good processes in place and to be able to prove it. So, obviously there's an opportunity there. What I am seeing is that there's a lot of technology companies that are trying to enter the space without being experts in the subject matter, which is not to say they can't do it, but it's also, it's sort of a Johnny-come-lately sort of approach, which I've talked to a few of our clients and, peers who are having some confusing experiences with some of these different offerings. So I feel like one thing to recognize is that while that technology and things like AI are making this space really attractive, because there is a lot of improvements that can be made just as a practice, right? We also are seeing that marketplace become flooded, and it's becoming a little bit harder for our customers who maybe don't have years and years and years of third-party risk management to really clearly identify what their requirements are. So that's one thing I wanted to say in general about the size and explosion of technology. But more importantly, for third-party risk management, what is really positive for the organizations that really do understand that as a practice and really are experts in that space is we are able to move so much faster to automate these processes. So, I ran third-party risk management programs forever, and I remember everything, the spreadsheets and this spreadsheet, and go call AP for this report and put all the numbers in. We have just like APIs, for example, that are able to connect your third-party risk management data to relevant systems like finance, procurement, contracting even, which one is improving the quality of the practice, but it's also delivering a lot more actionable data for the organization. So it's not even just about risk data. I mean, I'm sure Daniel can talk to us about, being on the procurement or supply chain side and really understanding how a vendor's been performing when you're in the middle of an RFP can be like super valuable. So, I mean, those are just some of my thoughts about the space.
So let me just follow up on a couple of things. So in third-party risk specifically, are you finding for organizations that have formalized third-party risk function, whether it sits in the vendor management office or it sits in its own, what percentage of those, if you had to take a wild guess, are actually automating their risk assessment process? So there's still a lot of people on spreadsheets and emails and things like that, or are you finding most folks are at least have adopted something at this point?
Well, it's interesting because we're in the middle of our annual survey. So I just was looking at some numbers the other day. And what's really great, at least for the people, in our space, is that a large majority of people do have really established processes, say, for risk assessment, right? What is happening, and I've been looking at this data for 3 years now, is that we are seeing more robust and established practices, right? So that's the first part. That's the foundation. You got to have the practice in place. It's got to work before you can start automating. And so we do see a lot of automation, and it's kind of, not just about like it's a nice to have, but for many organizations, it's a need to have. We just don't have really big third-party risk management teams. So we have to do more with less. And that technology and automation, if it's appropriate and it's actually, doing what it's supposed to do, it's not just like a weird, bell and whistle, that can really be a game changer for organizations and third-party risk management teams. We can do more with less, we can do it faster, we can have better data.
Yeah. So a lot of our clients actually that we're working with, because a lot of our clients are just starting a more formalized vendor management function and aren't really doing consistent risk management, I would say. They're on the front end. So a lot of them don't have any type of platform. So I think the low-hanging fruit there is you really do need to adopt a platform that's going to enable you to automate your risk management process, do your due diligence, automate your risk remediation, track all that kind of stuff as well. But for those that have something, like the folks that are responding to your survey, where should they be focusing? Is it risk intelligence solutions? So, because a lot of organizations are still doing point-in-time questionnaires. So they do it once a year, they do it once every other year. They're looking at risk at one point in time, usually it's during contracting, right?
Yeah.
And then they're not looking at it again. And the relationship changes, the scope of work changes, the risks change. So where should folks be looking that already have something? Is it risk intelligence, or where would that be?
Well, I definitely think that automation in general, I mean, even for folks that are using a platform, that doesn't necessarily mean that all the functionality is enabled, or that they've automated, or they've made good use of, those APIs that can tap into things like finance data.
Good point.
So for the folks that we're talking about, yes, manual processes are, they're problem laden for many reasons. They're error prone. They are, they just take longer to execute, and they really do not leverage all that good data connectivity. I mean, I've known some Excel whizzes, but it still takes quite a time to put all the formulas in to pull just even a basic report. So, I think the first thing is if you aren't using a platform, if you aren't using automation, and standardization is a very big part of that, right? Those platforms enforce standardization, so we can compare risks. That's really important. But the next thing for folks that are maybe more established in that process is to really look at, yes, risk intelligence and that monitoring, because third-party risk management is very front-end heavy, everything in that planning and risk assessment stage, right? But to your point, if we're not leveraging this technology, this automation, and all this wonderful data to help us do that day-to-day risk management, it's a little bit lopsided as a proposition. So we got to be really strong coming in. We got to really vet and do the due diligence, but we need to keep our eye on them. And that technology and automation is so ripe for that space. And I've seen so many solutions. I know we have one, and a few years ago, running programs, I would have given my eye teeth for risk intelligence, right? I mean, I had so many Google alerts set up and was trying to read trade journals, and trying to get people to get me industry gossip. It's just, it's too much.
Yeah.
So yeah, that risk monitoring is absolutely a place to focus.
Yeah, that's a really interesting I think as AI is getting more integrated into those tools, because it was really hard to figure out the stuff you need to focus on versus the noise sometimes, but I think AI is helping that. Okay, thanks for that. Hey, so Daniel, let me come over to you, maybe focus a little more on the procurement and contract lifecycle management side of things. What are you seeing over there? And one of the things I know is that I'm seeing there's just a lot, there's a lot of expansion of the type of features and functionality that some of these platforms are offering. I know at Gatekeeper, for example, you guys changed from contract lifecycle management software to vendor and contract lifecycle management software last year, just in terms of how you were talking about your solution. So can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the space, where you think the opportunities are for folks to leverage this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just quickly on the point of changing from a sort of CLM to a vendor and contract lifecycle management platform. I was actually a customer of Gatekeeper right before I joined Gatekeeper. I brought it and implemented it and used it. And one of the reasons I brought Gatekeeper was because it did this unique thing in the market, right? It took the vendor lifecycle, contract lifecycle, and the risk, the TPRM cycle, and bundled it all together. And I was sort of sat across legal, risk, and supplier management, aka procurement. And it was really hard to find solutions that kind of did all of that without having a huge tech stack. And I think to your point, Tom, if you know, I was at DPW, an event in Amsterdam in October with Gatekeeper, and there was maybe 120 different procurement tech vendors all in, you know,
That's a big procurement event in
yeah,
Europe, right?
in Europe. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's coming to the US. I think this year in New York at some point later this year is a wonderful event. And you know, I toured around, and what you're seeing in the tech space is pretty much everyone's doing a bit of everything, right? So how do you sort of differentiate yourself as a tech provider? And the opportunity we saw at Gatekeeper was, you know, in this vendor management space, it just felt a bit weak across the product offering and also the content offering, right? I think people sort of overlook that when they think about a SaaS platform. It's not just the platform you're buying, you're also buying into the thought leadership, that way of working, that way of doing things, and all the support. So we just found a really good opportunity there. Just quickly on some like low hanging fruit, because I know you used that phrase early on. Hilary kind of talked to some of this as well, but there's so many really good opportunities to go from manual to automated very fast. And I think of processes like vendor onboarding, the sending out of reviews, the sending out of questionnaires, coming back to review and approve that, and then put that on sort of a yearly cycle. You can automate all of that, that sort of one time or that moment in time review. And then say, for example, on the contract side, myself and James at Gatekeeper, just before Christmas, we kind of did a webinar on this, and we showed off like what a manual contract review process could look like in something like Gatekeeper, or you know, you could replicate that via Excel or email. But we also showed the complete opposite, right? Where you need an NDA, you press a button for an NDA, it sends it out to your vendor, and the next second the vendor has an NDA that's gone through all the correct audit trail. It's all pre-approved and everything, and it's with them for signature. And it's just learning how to do things like that. There's a level of digital competency that needs to be learned by people in procurement, legal, risk. I would even say finance. Hilary made a really good point of APIs and that connectivity point. If we don't have connectivity with our way of thinking in regards to what tech we're using. So if I've got a TPRM solution, I've got a contracted in solution here, how does that perhaps connect with our ERP or whatever? We really do need that connectivity. So it's having all of those thoughts there. But I think that, you know, when you're going from manual to sort of digital, just optimize one process at a time and just take your time there. And I think the automation point, and you know, people will echo this, I think, and agree with this. And I think Elon, I read in his latest book that he changed his rules, and automation always comes last now because you end up automating things that you sometimes don't even need. And I think people get in this trap when they're working with manual processes that you sort of need to replicate it in digital. But what you realize is when you start playing around with, say, a digital workflow builder, is that, oh, actually, I can do things that I didn't realize were possible. And you can completely break your manual process and change it. So you almost have to think digitally benefits in the first place. And Hilary made this point when she was just talking about, you know, people may have the platform, but if they're not using it to its potential, if they don't have it all like set up correct, you don't have the configuration, it's kind of pointless. So just learning how to be digital in this space, I think, is a really good skill set there.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'll tell you, you'd be shocked. Maybe you wouldn't be shocked, but I always think of things as kind of crawl, walk, run, right? And it amazes me how many people are, just take contracts, for example. Daniel, you were talking about tools now, like a CLM tool that allows you to have standard templates in there. You hit a button, it sends it out, you're done. A lot of organizations still don't have any idea where their contracts are, how many contracts they have, who the owner of the contract is. And so part of me is while there's a lot going on with technology, AI is a big part of it. I think integrating to other systems, there's a lot of integration. Hilary, you talked about risk intelligence solutions before. There's also solutions for supplier diversity, solutions around there's different ways in which you can integrate information into your system for kind of a higher level thinking. There's more of those platforms that are coming out as well. But for the organizations that don't have visibility into their contracts, or they're doing manual purchase orders, or they're sending out, you know, Excel files for their risk assessments, for their third-party risk assessments, The low-hanging fruit there is figure out, and you mentioned this, Daniel, where do you want to start? Where's your biggest opportunity for improving the use of technology across your vendor management operations? Is your focus around risk management? Is your focus around spend management and procurement? Is your focus around contracting and contract performance and visibility and SLA management? We have clients that come from all three of those different points of view. And one of those places is usually their starting point, where their biggest pain point is. And as you guys know, while the software solutions, including, I mean, you guys have two really robust, great software solutions, but not everybody is great at everything, right? You can't, Hilary Venminder is built to do third-party risk. It's not built to do competitive bidding and RFPs and purchase to pay and things like that. All those are aspects of kind of vendor management. So to me, there's all these great tools that are out there now. If you're not leveraging them for those operational areas that you really care about, that should be your main focus this year. Go figure out what that focal point is, and go evaluate the platforms that are in the market, because there are so many of them out there and there's so much you can do. And then on the last, Daniel, you were talking about processes. The other thing, people love spending money for software, right? I mean, they love buying software. Most of the time when they're ready to buy, they have no clue what their procedures are. They have no clue what the roles and responsibilities are going to be. They're just ready to buy software. So it's really important that, Hilary, you'd mentioned this earlier about opportunities to improve use of technology. It's also looking at your procedures and making sure that what you're doing makes sense, it's efficient. Like on the third-party risk side, you're asking the right questions. You're not just asking a bunch of questions to ask them. You're actually thoughtful, and you're going to use the information to make decisions. I mean, all that stuff ties into how you can optimize technology, whether you don't have any and you need to get it, or you've got some and you need to optimize it.
Tom, I just want to add something on to what you said, which is really powerful and it's really important, is people love to buy software. They're very excited about automation and technology and AI. It's kind of like, if you're buying a lot of software and technology without understanding your baseline requirements or your baseline capabilities, right? You're buying features and stuff that, one, you're not ready to use, you're not ready to operationally, engage with. So I feel like one really important consideration is, to Daniel's point, one thing at a time, make sure you know what problem you're trying to solve, because that is probably one of the biggest issues I see. Is people want, well, we can do all this stuff. Yes, but what do you need to be doing? What is going to move the dial for your organization? Where do you have problems? And I think that that's sort of the technology discussion we're not having enough. Is, yes, everybody can do everything. It's all very fancy. What is it that we need to do and get that?
Yeah, and focus in on that versus getting enamored with the sexiness of software.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Software is sexy. Procedures and policies aren't sexy, but they're what make it run at the end of the day. All right, so let me move this on. We've got time for one more topic, and then I want to give you guys a little bit of time to kind of share, because there's so much happening. We've put together 10 trends that we're focusing on this year. We're only going to get to a handful of them, but I wanted to give you all the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the other areas that you think folks should be focusing on. So the last topic I want to talk about with you, maybe in the next 5 to 6 minutes, is operational resilience. One of the things I think we all saw with COVID, all the issues with supply chain problems that we had. As I mentioned earlier, companies are outsourcing more services to vendors than ever before. In a lot of cases, they're critical services, things that if something goes wrong with the vendor downstream, it flows upstream, it impacts operations and the stability of organizations, their ability to deliver key services, products, maybe even produce revenue. We had a client that had a vendor go bankrupt. They notified them, I think they gave them a 2-day notice that they went bankrupt, and they were a critical service provider for them. They did services that were producing revenue our client. And luckily, they have a vendor management office in place. They had saw some warning signs early on, and they actually started moving business away from that vendor before the vendor notified them they went bankrupt. So they were doing good risk management, but that doesn't always happen. So let me just briefly, if you guys give me your thoughts, Hilary or Daniel, either one of you guys, what do you think that folks should be thinking about when it comes to business continuity and operational resilience, and the types of things they should be thinking about this year as they're managing their key vendor relationships?
A lot of thoughts on this. I'll try and narrow it to the most cogent ones, but one of the things that I constantly try and reinforce with folks is the importance of monitoring your business continuity and resiliency plans, just like any other risk point. One, you go in and you're doing that annual review. Hey, we looked at the plan. It looks great. File it. What I would like to suggest instead for folks, especially for those critical vendors and high-risk vendors or single point of failure vendors, right? They don't even have to be that critical, but they're a single point of failure, is to integrate as an agenda item a review of business continuity and resiliency as part of your regular performance reviews, right? We're just going to keep that as a line item. So we're going to every quarter, we're going to say, are all these names still correct? Has anything changed with this plan? Have there been any incidents? One of the biggest things that I've seen time and time again is that there's a reorg and roles and responsibilities are different and they're not reflected in that plan. So, this is your vendor, they give you your plan, here's your call tree, it's not even correct. So that's the first thing.
So real quick, sorry, just to clarify on that. So to drill down for a second. So, hey, most organizations are typically, when they do their point in time due diligence, usually contracting, they're asking for a business continuity disaster recovery plan from key third party. They're looking at it, and then maybe they look at it again when they do their next point in time assessment. You're saying, hey, do that, but you also need to be looking at it at least for whatever your normal cadence of your business reviews are. Go back in, verify that everything's still okay, nothing's happened, the same people are in place, so that you're monitoring that and you're not just leaving it for your annual review later on, right?
Exactly, because I will tell you, if you can make it top of mind for your vendor as part of that performance review, you will be surprised at how frequently things are tweaked. Oh no, that guy left, or we've changed our backup cloud provider, whatever it may be. So just keep it as a regular agenda item in your business reviews. All right, that's one thing. The other thing is to think about concentration risk. And we always think about this as like, oh, do we have our business with, too much business with the same vendor? What we need to also be thinking about is, hey, that's a really big vendor that services, thousands and thousands of customers. Are they actually going to be able to deliver this level of business resiliency if they're servicing all those customers? And I think we need to really drill into that, because, they have limited resources, no matter how big they are. And in the event of a business interrupting crisis, a weather event, whatever, they still got all those stresses too. And they're trying to deliver that same level of service to all of their customers. So that is definitely something to consider and question. And then the last thing I would say about business continuity and resiliency is to make sure that as third-party risk management practitioners, that you have a good working relationship with the folks at your organization who do the internal business resiliency planning, right? Make sure that those critical vendors are on their radar. How do they connect into our own resiliency? What if we have our vendor go down and we go down at the same time? What's going to happen? So those are some of the things that I don't think we're talking enough about, but I really think should be top of mind for folks as they're thinking about this.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. And, a lot of organizations don't have a clue who their critical vendors are, or who are providing key services that tie into their own operational resilience. I mean, we work with a lot of mid-market size organizations. Some of them don't have a formal risk management function. In fact,
Yeah.
a number of them don't have formal risk management. So when you talk about their own resiliency, they're not even sure about that because they don't have a formal structure in place to do it. So they're trying to kind of piecemeal things as they go. But I think that's really good advice, which is, hey, make sure, number one, you've got a contingency plan for those key vendors, whoever they might be, and that you're monitoring stuff on an ongoing basis, especially through your business reviews, if you're doing business reviews, so that you're actually asking those questions so that you're prepared if something does go bad. Daniel, anything you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, firstly, everything Hilary said, I completely agree with. And in my role prior to Gatekeeper, one thing that we were doing contractually was making sure that the contracts were robust around those obligations of our vendors to make sure they do provide updated information. Some of it may be on a yearly cycle, right? For the ones that we really almost the checkbox ones. And I hate to say that. Some of them are just like they're transactional. We don't worry too much about them. If they go down, it's not the end of the world. We've got plenty of other vendors that we can go to. But for the ones that we really care about, anytime that they make a change within their organization, we make that a contractual obligation that they have to update us proactively. And it's quite hard to monitor, though. I appreciate that. So making it an agenda item in your vendor reviews for those kinds of vendors, you would certainly have a regular cadence of whether it's performance meetings or just just in general meetings for relationship building and things like that. So yeah, echo that. I'm going to make two other points, and I'm not going to take too much time up with the second one, but just say cybersecurity within your supply chain is just scaring me more than anything at the moment. And there's every week there's something new, and this has kind of been the trend as far back as I can remember. When I was studying my master's in 2014 or something, I was trying to get a PhD in this area of cyber security and contracting because of how scary it was back then. It's only scarier now. The British Library was just hacked. We just found out about that, and their services are pretty much going to be down all year. So it just shows how big an impact an event like that can have on an organization. And then, Tom, you kind of just prompted this third point, which is some organizations don't know who their critical vendors are. They don't know which ones are important. And we've kind of highlighted in this webinar that there's a lot of hype around AI and digital and things like that, but there's a lot of the boring, the non-sexy work that people are not doing enough of, right? And one of those things that people should certainly be doing when it comes to their vendors is that segmentation piece, which is figure out who are your critical vendors. And if you come back with a number that's more than 10% of your entire vendor base, then you haven't figured it out. And don't just figure this out by the spend value. Spend values are so they're an okay indicator, right? But if I have an IT equipment vendor, if I'm buying 1,000 MacBooks, that's going to cost a lot of money. But really, I could probably find a whole bunch of other vendors that can do that. You really need to build in that risk side. So whether you do that based off of your due diligence responses that you get from your vendors, whether it's the connectivity piece, the APIs that you get from sort of those credit checks, cyber checks, ESG checks, things like that. I think you really need to mature the way in which you're segmenting or tiering, or depending on what language you use, so that you have those sort of under 10% of your vendor base that are the ones you're pretty much going to deal with every day. Maybe you've got a second tier, which is, they have some light touch, and that also impacts on how you contract with them. And then you have, like I've just mentioned, those transactional ones where it's almost tail spend at that point, right? You've got so many options, and maybe you've even outsourced that. There's so many options there.
No, that's great. So I think you've hit on a couple of the added trends that you wanted to mention as well. So cyber, obviously, that's not going away. That's always going to be here. It's the regulatory requirements as well as just the breaches. I mean, I get a letter a month from somebody that I use that said something was breached, and I get a free monitoring software for a year.
I had one today. just earlier. Like,
I mean,
I was pwned that wonderful service. So yeah, it's
that's
every
not
day.
going away. Yeah, and the regulatory requirements are not going away. They're just starting to get hopefully more consistent across the different regulatory bodies, but that's there. But I think you mentioned a real quick an important thing on the risk side, which is spend. Spend is not a driver of risk. Spend is a factor of risk, but it isn't a driver. And so many people that aren't doing formalized third-party risk management now want to use spend as to determine how critical a relationship is. In your example, Daniel, if I buy 10,000 laptop computers, that's a transactional vendor. That's not a critical, most likely. It's probably
Yeah,
not
I agree.
for me,
Absolutely.
right? It's transactional. I can get them from Dell, HP, whatever I need to do. But I might be spending a little teeny bit of money with somebody that I've got PII flowing through their software, or if I'm in healthcare, I have PHI flowing through their software. And it doesn't matter how much I spend, because if my data gets breached, I'm screwed, right? So really figuring out who those critical service providers are and what's driving that, and having good controls over third-party risk. Hilary, I've got maybe a couple more minutes. Is there anything else that was on your mind that you want to talk about, that you're looking at trends for this year?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on the cybersecurity, and I'm going to talk about cyber insurance, which, we look at insurance frequently as third-party risk, folks. As part of our due diligence, oh, did they give us a certificate of insurance? Yep, check the box. Where I think we need to be, especially where we have more exposure through, data and, various like cloud providers, is to really understand, is it enough insurance? How well does it actually protect us? Because, insurance is complicated, and there's, how much the insurer will pay per incident and how much they'll pay in total. So back to that example, I have the same cloud provider as 50 other clients. They're only going to pay $1 million per incident. And they have, 50 other clients, but they have a $5 million cap. So is that going to be enough? And one of the things that we really need to think about as part of our cybersecurity strategy is to raise our hands and say, is anyone talking to our insurance providers, like our organization's providers, to make sure that we have good coverage? Because I hate to say it, but, I've been in the position more than once where we've elected as an organization to buy up coverage because the likelihood of the vendor being adequately able to bridge that gap is very low. So that's one thing I just want to have people pay attention to is, with all this new technology comes more sophisticated data attacks and, ransom. You got to know where your liability is, where your indemnification is, and how much insurance is really necessary.
Yeah, no, that's a great add-on. And I think that's a not a specific trend that we highlighted, but definitely a trend. We're finding more companies are both requiring their vendors have some level of cyber insurance, right? And more companies are getting cyber insurance. Now, what all that means and how much you should get and what your caps are, that's where you need an expert, not like me. You need somebody who actually knows insurance to advise you on that. But I think that's a trend to try to mitigate the fact that breaches are happening. They're not going to not happen. And so you've got to find other ways that you need to address those types of risks. Well, listen, guys, we're like 2 minutes out. There's like 8 more trends we could talk about. We couldn't get to on this one, but it was a great conversation. I want to thank you both for joining me on this. I hope those of you that attended, I hope you got a lot out of this, some good practical stuff, as well as some thoughtful stuff about what we're seeing. So with that, I want to thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to close us out.
Great, Tom. Thanks so much. And for the 3 of you, just an amazing discussion. I'm sure we all picked up a few valuable insights to carry us through the year. Just a few things before we go. To our attendees, we really appreciate you joining today. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to the questions, so we do have a few questions. I'll bring them to Tom and the panel afterwards. We'll share those with the recording with some responses from the panelists, so you'll have those. And lastly, we're going to be offering another panel here in February, Unlock the Power of Vendor Management Success Stories for Companies Blazing the Trail. So it's sure to be another powerhouse panel. And if you get a chance, you can scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen and register right now. We'll certainly send out invitations as well. So again, thanks everyone so much. I really appreciate your attendance and your attention, and hope to see you in February. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Hilary. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.